The moment Marcus slid that manila folder across the conference table, he watched the CEO's face go from confusion to recognition to absolute terror in under 3 seconds. Inside that folder was a single file, a file that had been buried in the company servers for 4 years, a file that was about to destroy everything. But to understand how a quiet IT worker ended up holding the nuclear codes to $1 billion company, you need to hear how it all started. And trust me, this one's worth the wait. But before we get there, let me tell you about Derek. Because Derek's story is where we begin. And what Derek did to his manager set off a chain of events that would eventually connect all 3 of the stories I'm about to tell you today. Derek had been working as a junior financial analyst at a mid-sized consulting firm in Atlanta for just over 2 years. Good job, decent salary, nothing spectacular, but enough to pay off his student loans and save for a house. His manager was a guy named Victor. And Victor was the kind of boss who made you question your entire career choice every single morning. Here's the thing about Victor. He wasn't just incompetent, he was strategically incompetent. He had this talent for taking credit when things went well and vanishing into thin air when things went wrong. And Derek, being young and eager and frankly a little naive, kept delivering excellent work that Victor would present to senior leadership as his own. For 18 months, Derek didn't say anything. He told himself it was just paying dues. Everyone deals with a bad boss at some point, right? That's what his dad told him. Keep your head down, do good work, and eventually someone will notice. But here's what Derek didn't know yet. Victor wasn't just stealing credit. Victor was actively sabotaging him. The first sign was the performance review. Derek had closed 3 major accounts that quarter, brought in over $400,000 in new business. His review came back with a rating of needs improvement. When he asked Victor about it, Victor just shrugged and said, "The numbers don't tell the whole story, Derek. Leadership skills, teamwork, soft factors. You've got room to grow." Derek was confused, but he accepted it. He figured he'd work harder, prove himself. What he didn't know was that Victor had been telling senior leadership that Derek was difficult to work with, that he had attitude problems, that he'd been warned multiple times about his behaviour. None of it was true, not a single word. The second sign came 3 months later. Derek applied for a promotion to senior analyst, a position he was absolutely qualified for, a position that came with a $12,000 raise. He didn't even get an interview. When he asked HR about it, they told him, very politely, that his file indicated some concerns about his professional development. That was Victor's phrase, professional development. Derek had heard him use it before, always with that same condescending smile. Now, if this was just a story about a guy getting passed over for a promotion, I wouldn't be telling it. But what happened next is what separates Derek from everyone else who's ever had a terrible boss. Derek started paying attention. Really paying attention. He noticed that Victor always took calls in the stairwell instead of his office. He noticed that Victor's calendar was blocked out every Thursday afternoon for client meetings that never seemed to produce any notes or follow-ups. He noticed that Victor got nervous, actually nervous, whenever the CFO walked through the department. Looking back, this was the moment that sealed Victor's fate. Derek didn't do anything dramatic. He didn't confront Victor or storm into HR. Instead, he started documenting. Every email, every meeting, every instance of Victor taking credit for someone else's work. He created a spreadsheet, time-stamped everything, cross-referenced it with the actual project files. After 2 months, he had 47 documented instances of intellectual theft. 47 times that Victor had claimed work he hadn't done. But that wasn't the good stuff. The good stuff came when Derek finally figured out what those Thursday afternoon meetings were really about. Victor was running a side business, using company resources, company time, and in some cases, company clients. He had set up a small consulting firm with his brother-in-law and was funneling leads from his actual job to this shadow company. The conflict of interest was so blatant that Derek almost laughed when he found the evidence. Now here's where Derek was smart. He didn't take this to HR. He didn't take it to Victor's boss. He knew that in corporate America, the messenger often gets shot first and asked questions never. Instead, Derek requested a meeting with the CFO directly. He framed it as a financial concern he'd noticed while reviewing some accounts. The CFO, a woman named Patricia, who was known for being ruthlessly efficient, agreed to a 15-minute meeting. Derek walked into that meeting with his spreadsheet, his documentation, and printouts of Victor's shadow company website. He laid it all out in 12 minutes, professional and calm, no emotion, just facts. Patricia didn't say much. She just asked Derek to leave the documents with her and thanked him for bringing it to her attention. 3 days later, Victor was escorted from the building by security. No goodbye email, no transition period, just gone. His desk was cleared out by facilities that same afternoon. But here's the satisfying part, the part that makes this story worth telling. 2 weeks after Victor was fired, Derek was called into Patricia's office again. He thought maybe he was in trouble. Maybe Victor had somehow blamed him on the way out. Instead, Patricia offered him Victor's job. Not senior analyst, manager. A $42,000 raise, a corner office, and a team of 6 people. You showed more integrity in one meeting than Victor showed in 3 years, Patricia told him. That's the kind of person I want running this department. Derek took the job, and the first thing he did as manager was update the performance reviews for everyone Victor had sabotaged.
Turns out Derek wasn't the only one.
But if you think that story was satisfying, the next one takes it to a completely different level. Because the next story involves a woman named Cassandra, a tech startup that raised $80 million, and a revenge plan so patient, so methodical, that it took 3 years to execute. And when it finally landed, it didn't just destroy one career, it destroyed an entire company. Cassandra was a senior software engineer at a San Francisco startup called Nexum. They made enterprise security software, the kind of thing that protects banks and hospitals from hackers. She'd been there since nearly the beginning, employee number 14, and she'd helped build the core product from the ground up. For 5 years, Cassandra was golden. Perfect performance reviews, stock options, respect from everyone on the engineering team. She'd turned down offers from Google and Microsoft because she believed in what Nexum was building. She thought she was going to retire from this company, thought she'd be there when they went public, and then they hired Richard. Richard came in as the new VP of Engineering, brought in by the board to professionalize the company before their Series C funding round. He had an MBA from Wharton, a background in management consulting, and absolutely zero understanding of how software actually worked. Within his first month, Richard had restructured the entire engineering department. He implemented something he called Agile Plus, which was basically regular Agile, but with twice as many meetings and half as much actual coding time. Productivity dropped by 30%. Richard blamed the engineers. Cassandra tried to work with him. She really did. She scheduled one-on-ones, she provided data showing that the new processes were slowing them down, she offered suggestions for improvement. Richard smiled through every meeting, thanked her for her input, and changed absolutely nothing. But here's what Cassandra didn't know yet. What she was about to discover would change everything. 6 months into Richard's tenure, Cassandra noticed something strange. 2 of her best engineers, people she personally mentored and developed, were suddenly being written up for performance issues that didn't exist. One of them, a guy named Kevin, who was probably the most talented developer at the company, got put on a performance improvement plan for failure to meet deadlines. Kevin had never missed a deadline in his life. Cassandra did some digging. What she found made her sick. Richard was systematically pushing out the experienced engineers, the ones who'd been there before him, the ones who might challenge his authority. He was replacing them with fresh graduates he could pay half as much and control twice as easily. But the worst part, the part that made Cassandra decide she was going to destroy this man's career, was the discovery that Richard had been taking credit for the core security algorithm. The algorithm that Cassandra had designed. The algorithm that was literally the reason Nexum existed. He had filed patent paperwork listing himself as the primary inventor. Cassandra's name wasn't even on it. If only Richard had known what she was about to discover. Because that patent filing wasn't the only document Cassandra would find. For the next 6 months, Cassandra became a ghost. She did her job, stayed quiet, and spent every spare moment investigating. She learned that Richard had done this before at 2 previous companies. He had a pattern. Come in, claim credit for existing work, push out the original creators, and leverage the stolen accomplishments to jump to an even bigger role at an even bigger company. She found 3 former employees from Richard's previous companies who were willing to talk. All of them had similar stories. All of them had been pushed out after Richard arrived. One of them had tried to fight back legally and had been buried in legal fees by the company's lawyers. Cassandra knew she couldn't fight this head-on. She needed to be smarter than that. So she started collecting. Every email, every document, every meeting recording where Richard claimed credit for work he hadn't done. She was meticulous. She was patient. She built a case file that would make a federal prosecutor weep with joy. And then, exactly 3 years after Richard was hired, Nexum announced their IPO. The company was valued at $1.2 billion. Richard was going to make $40 million from his stock options. This was when Cassandra made her move. 3 weeks before the IPO, Cassandra sent an anonymous email to the SEC, the company's largest investors, and the board of directors. Attached to that email were 400 pages of documentation proving that Richard had committed securities fraud by misrepresenting his contributions to the company's core technology in investor materials. She also included evidence that Richard had orchestrated a pattern of discrimination against senior employees, creating a paper trail of fabricated performance issues to justify terminations. And she included the patent filing, the one that listed Richard as the inventor of technology that Cassandra had created 4 years before he even joined the company. The IPO was postponed. An investigation was launched. Richard was suspended pending review. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. When the investigators started digging into Richard's background, they found something Cassandra hadn't even known about. Richard had falsified his credentials. His MBA from Wharton? He'd attended 1 semester and dropped out. His previous VP role at a Fortune 500 company? He'd been a senior manager, not a VP, and he'd been asked to resign. The entire house of cards came down. Richard was terminated for cause, which meant he lost all of his stock options. Every single one. He went from being worth $40 million to owing the company money, relocation expenses they'd paid when they hired him. But Cassandra wasn't done. She had saved one final piece of evidence. A recording of a meeting where Richard had explicitly told her that he was going to claim credit for her algorithm because, and this is a direct quote, "Nobody's going to believe a woman invented something this technical." That recording went to a reporter at TechCrunch. The story ran 3 days later. Richard's career in Silicon Valley was over before the news cycle ended. Cassandra got a settlement from the company for $870,000. She got her name added to the patent as the sole inventor, and she got an offer from Google that she finally decided to accept. Richard, last anyone heard, is selling cars in Phoenix. Nothing wrong with selling cars, but it's a long fall from $40 million and a corner office in San Francisco. Now that story took 3 years to unfold. But the next story, the final story, the one I teased at the very beginning, that story only took 4 months. But in those 4 months, Marcus, our IT worker, didn't just destroy one career or embarrass one executive. He exposed a conspiracy that brought down an entire company and sent 2 people to prison. This is the one you've been waiting for, and I promise you, it's worth it. Sterling Financial was a regional investment firm with about 800 employees and roughly $3 billion in assets under management. Wasn't Goldman Sachs, but it wasn't small either. They'd been in business for 40 years, survived the 2008 financial crisis, and had a reputation for being boring but reliable. Marcus had worked in their IT department for 6 years. He wasn't management, wasn't anybody important, just a guy who kept the servers running and fixed people's computers when they forgot their passwords. The thing about IT workers is that people forget they exist. Executives will have the most sensitive conversations of their careers, while the IT guy is under their desk fixing their cable management. They'll leave documents open on their screens, while IT is remotely troubleshooting their printer. They'll send emails they shouldn't send, forget to lock their computers, leave passwords on sticky notes. Marcus had seen things over 6 years, things he was supposed to pretend he didn't see. Personal emails, gambling problems, affairs with co-workers. He never said anything because that wasn't his job. His job was to make the computers work. But then they laid off his entire team. Sterling Financial decided to outsource their IT to a managed services provider. Cheaper, they said, more efficient. The whole department, 12 people, got 2 weeks' notice and 3 months severance. Marcus wasn't bitter at first. Layoffs happen. He was 42 years old, had good experience, figured he'd find something new. But what happened in his final 2 weeks changed everything. His manager, a guy named Dennis, who'd been at the company for 20 years, pulled him aside on his second to last day. Dennis looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Marcus," Dennis said, "I need you to do something for me. I need you to delete some files from the archive server before you leave." Marcus had done file deletions before. People left the company, their data got purged after 90 days, standard stuff. But something about the way Dennis was asking felt wrong. He was sweating. His hands were shaking. "What files?" Marcus asked. Dennis handed him a piece of paper with a file path written on it. "Just delete everything in this directory. Don't look at it, don't copy it, just delete it and empty the backups." Now, a smarter man might have just done what he was told. Marcus was leaving anyway. What did he care about Sterling Financial's internal files? But Marcus wasn't a smarter man. Marcus was a curious man. And curious men open folders they're told not to open. What Marcus found in that directory was a folder labelled Project Greenfield. Inside were hundreds of documents, spreadsheets, email chains, and what appeared to be internal memos from the executive team. Marcus didn't understand most of it at first. It was financial jargon, numbers he didn't recognise, client names he'd never heard. But one email caught his attention. It was from the CEO, a man named Howard Sterling, the grandson of the company's founder. The email was addressed to the CFO and the Chief Compliance Officer. The subject line was RE, Asset Reallocation, Urgent. The email said, and Marcus read this 3 times to make sure he understood it, "We need to accelerate the timeline, move the funds before the audit, use the secondary accounts we discussed. This needs to be invisible." Marcus wasn't a financial expert, but he'd worked in finance long enough to know what "move the funds before the audit" meant. That meant fraud. That meant stealing. He kept reading.
What he found was evidence of a scheme that had been running for over 3 years.
Sterling Financial had been using client funds, retirement accounts, pension money, to cover losses in the company's proprietary trading division. They'd taken tens of millions of dollars from people's life savings to hide bad bets made by the executives. And now, with regulators sniffing around, they were trying to move the money to offshore accounts before anyone noticed it was gone. Marcus sat in that server room for 4 hours reading everything. By the time he was done, he understood exactly what he was looking at. He also understood why Dennis had asked him to delete it. The layoffs weren't about efficiency. The layoffs were about getting rid of the people who had access to the evidence. Now here's where Marcus could have made several choices. He could have deleted the files like Dennis asked and walked away with his severance. He could have gone to the company's legal department and probably gotten himself sued into oblivion. He could have contacted the regulators anonymously and hoped they did something about it. But Marcus had been fixing computers for executives for 6 years. He'd been invisible, forgettable, beneath notice. And he was about to use that to his advantage. On his last day at Sterling Financial, Marcus didn't delete those files. Instead, he made copies. 3 copies, actually. One on an encrypted drive he kept at home, one uploaded to a secure cloud server, and one that he mailed to himself at his sister's address in another state. Then he went to the archive server and deleted the original directory, exactly as Dennis had asked. He even emptied the backup tapes. Dennis was visibly relieved. He shook Marcus's hand and thanked him for his years of service. Marcus smiled and said it was his pleasure. For the next 3 months, Marcus didn't do anything. He collected unemployment, sent out resumes, acted like every other laid-off IT worker in America. But he was watching, reading the news about Sterling Financial, waiting for the right moment. That moment came when Sterling Financial announced a merger with a larger investment firm, a $2 billion deal that would make the executives rich and give them legal cover to leave the company before anyone discovered what they'd done. The merger was scheduled to close in 60 days. Marcus made his move in 58. He contacted an attorney who specialized in whistleblower cases. He contacted a reporter at the Wall Street Journal who covered financial crimes. And he contacted the SEC's Office of the Whistleblower. Then he requested a meeting with Howard Sterling. This is where the story comes back to where we started. That conference room, that manila folder, the look on the CEO's face when he realized what was about to happen. Marcus walked into Sterling Financial's executive conference room on a Tuesday morning. Howard Sterling was there, along with the CFO, the Chief Compliance Officer, and 2 corporate attorneys. They thought Marcus was there to negotiate a better severance package, maybe threaten some kind of wrongful termination lawsuit. They had no idea. Marcus slid the folder across the table. Inside was a single document, a summary of Project Greenfield with enough detail to make it clear that he had everything. "Before you say anything," Marcus said, "I want you to know that copies of every file in that directory have already been delivered to the SEC, the FBI, and the Wall Street Journal. This meeting isn't a negotiation. This meeting is me giving you the opportunity to see my face while your world falls apart." Howard Sterling went pale. The CFO started stammering something about lawyers. The Chief Compliance Officer put his head in his hands. Marcus stood up. "You laid off 12 people to cover this up. People with families, people with mortgages, people who trusted you to do the right thing, and the whole time you were stealing from retirees and pensioners to cover your gambling losses." He walked to the door. "I hope it was worth it." The Wall Street Journal story broke the next morning. The merger was cancelled by noon. The SEC announced a formal investigation by the end of the week. Within 6 months, Howard Sterling and the CFO had been indicted on 23 counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. The chief compliance officer pleaded guilty and cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Sterling Financial was dissolved. Its assets were seized and distributed to the clients who had been stolen from. 800 people lost their jobs because of what the executives had done. But here's the part that made it all worth it for Marcus. The SEC's whistleblower program pays out between 10 and 30% of sanctions collected in cases where a whistleblower provides original information that leads to successful enforcement. In Marcus's case, the total sanctions exceeded $40 million. Marcus's cut was $4.7 million. He used part of it to hire Dennis's former secretary, who had also been laid off. He used another part to fund college scholarships for them, children of Sterling Financial employees who lost their jobs through no fault of their own. And he used the rest to retire at 43 years old to a house on a lake where he spends his mornings fishing and his afternoons absolutely not fixing anybody's computer. Howard Sterling is currently serving 8 years in federal prison. The CFO got 6. The company that had been in business for 40 years, that had survived every economic crisis of the modern era, ceased to exist because 3 men got greedy and 1 IT worker got curious. You know what the funny thing is? If they had just let Marcus keep his job, none of this would have happened. He would have gone his whole career without looking in that folder. He would have retired with a pension and never thought twice about Project Greenfield. But they got greedy. They got scared, and they made the fatal mistake of underestimating the guy who fixed their computers. Stories like these remind us that the people in charge don't always stay in charge. That karma has a way of finding the right people, even if it takes years. That sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody notices. Derek noticed patterns. Cassandra was patient. Marcus was curious. 3 ordinary people who refused to let injustice stand, who used their brains instead of their fists, who understood that the best revenge isn't loud or dramatic, it's methodical, it's documented, it's devastating. If you've got your own workplace revenge story, I want to hear it. Drop it in the comments. And if stories like this make your commute go faster, your workout more interesting, or your chores a little more bearable, you know what to do. Subscribe, hit that bell, and I'll see you in the next one. Because there's always another story. There's always another person who thinks they're untouchable. And there's always someone out there, right now, documenting everything. They just don't
know it yet.